The village of Ndimu stood between vast golden plains and thick, whispering forests. At its heart was the sacred Baobab tree, an ancient guardian under whose roots the elders swore the spirits of the ancestors dwelled. For generations, the tree had been a place of prayer, offerings, and storytelling. But there was one story the villagers refused to tell, one truth buried deep beneath its twisted roots. Amina, a young widow with a fierce spirit, often felt the weight of that silence. She had returned to her late husband's village seeking peace, but what she found was an unspoken fear that lurked in every shadow. People refused to go near the Baobab tree after sunset, and the elders grew uneasy whenever children played too close. One evening, as Amina walked past the tree, a sudden chill ran down her spine. The wind howled through the branches, and in its eerie rustling, she swore she heard faint, sorrowful voices calling her name. Amina. Her heart pounded. She turned, scanning the empty path, but no one was there. The voices seemed to seep from the ground itself. That night, unable to shake the feeling, she sought out her grandmother, Mama Combe, the oldest living woman in the village. The elder sat in the dim glow of an oil lamp, her eyes clouded with age yet sharp with wisdom. "Grandmother," Amina whispered, sitting before her, "there is something wrong with that tree." Mama Combe sighed, the lines on her face deepening. "There are things, child, that we do not speak of. For our own good." "But why? What happened?" The old woman shook her head. "Some truths bring only death." But Amina was not one to be silenced. That night, she made a decision: she would uncover whatever horror the village had buried. And as she drifted into restless sleep, she dreamt of two small children, their faces twisted in sorrow, standing beneath the Baobab tree, whispering her name. The next morning, Amina ventured to the tree. She pressed her hand against its rough bark, closing her eyes. A chilling breeze curled around her, and a whisper slid into her ear. "Find us." She staggered back, breathless. The spirits were real. And they wanted her to listen. Determined, she visited the village's oldest griot, Baba Mosi, known for preserving the stories no one else dared to tell. At first, he refused to speak. But when Amina pleaded, his eyes darkened, and he lowered his voice. Long ago, two children, twins, Adama and Nia, vanished from this village. They were last seen playing near that tree. His voice trembled. Days later, a hunter found their small bodies buried beneath its roots, lifeless and cold. Amina's breath hitched. Who did this? Baba Mosi hesitated. No one knows. But the night they disappeared, the chief's hut was filled with hushed voices, and the elders forbade anyone from asking questions. Anyone who did, vanished. Amina's blood ran cold. A conspiracy had silenced the village. But the spirits of the murdered children refused to be forgotten. And now, they had chosen her to uncover the truth. Amina knew she was being watched. Since speaking to Baba Mosi, she noticed lingering gazes, whispers trailing her footsteps. Fear crackled in the air. That night, she returned to the Baobab tree with a lantern and a small digging tool. The whispers grew louder as she knelt before the roots. You are close. Sweat trickled down her spine as she dug. The earth was stubborn, resisting her touch, but she pressed on until her fingers scraped something cold. Bone. A skull, small and fragile, rested beneath her trembling hands. She gasped, her stomach twisting. But before she could uncover more, a deep voice shattered the silence. You should not have done that. She spun around, heart hammering. Chief Abedi stood with several warriors, their faces grim. You have disturbed the dead, he said, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. And now, you must answer for it. The village gathered at the center, torches lighting the night. Amina was dragged before the elders, the skull cradled in her hands. You have dishonored our ancestors, one elder boomed. You dug where no one was meant to dig. Amina's fury burned through her fear. I uncovered the truth, she cried. These children were murdered. And you let their souls suffer in silence. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Chief Abedi's jaw tightened. You do not understand the weight of your accusations. Then explain. Amina demanded. A long silence stretched before the chief sighed. The twins were sacrificed. Gasps erupted. Amina felt the air rush from her lungs. It was the price the gods demanded, Abedi continued. A drought threatened to kill us all. The elders sought answers, and the diviners revealed that only a sacrifice of pure souls could save our land. Amina's hands shook with rage. You killed innocent children for rain? We did what was necessary. Tears burned in her eyes. And you let their spirits wander, alone and lost? The dead must remain silent, the chief warned. But Amina knew she could not let them win. Not anymore. A storm gathered that night, unlike any the village had seen before. The sky churned with dark clouds, and the wind howled like the voices of the forgotten dead. Amina stood before the ancient Baobab tree, clutching the small skull in her trembling hands. The earth beneath her feet rumbled, as if the ancestors themselves had awakened. Behind her, the villagers gathered in fearful silence, their faces illuminated by flickering torches. Chief Abedi and the elders stood rigid, their expressions a mix of defiance and dread. They had spent years silencing the truth, burying it beneath rituals and whispered warnings. But now, the past refused to stay buried. If the elders will not speak the truth, Amina said, her voice carrying over the wind, then let the spirits speak for themselves. She placed the skull at the base of the baobab and pressed her palm against the rough bark. The air grew thick, charged with something ancient and powerful. The wind howled, whipping through the village, and then a sound like a child's wail filled the air. It started as a whisper, rising from the roots of the baobab, then turned into a heart-wrenching cry. The villagers clutched their chests, fear gripping them as the voices of Adama and Nia echoed through the night. You took our lives. The tree shook violently, its branches clawing at the sky. A brilliant, searing light burst from the trunk, illuminating the entire village. Out of the glow, two small figures emerged, ethereal yet unmistakable. Adama and Nia. Their eyes burned with sorrow, their translucent hands reaching forward. The villagers gasped in horror as the children turned their gaze toward the elders. Chief Abedi's face drained of color. His lips moved, but no words came. The spirits of the murdered children drifted closer, their whispers turning into a furious chorus. You took our lives. You stole our breath. You let us suffer in silence. The ground trembled, and suddenly, one of the elders collapsed, clutching his chest. A terrible, invisible force gripped him, and he let out a choked gasp before falling lifeless to the ground. Panic spread through the crowd as another elder dropped, his breath stolen by the same unseen wrath. One by one, the elders who had orchestrated the sacrifice fell, their souls seemingly claimed by the very spirits they had wronged. The chief staggered back, his hands shaking. Please, he croaked. We meant no harm. It was for the village, for survival. But the spirits did not waver. They lifted their small, ghostly hands, and the chief let out a strangled cry, his body trembling violently. Amina watched as his once commanding presence crumbled. He gasped for air, his knees giving out. The spirits did not kill him, but they had taken his voice. His punishment was not death, but silence. A fitting fate for a man who had silenced the truth for so long. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm quieted. The spirits' glow dimmed, and their features softened. No longer angry, no longer lost, they looked to Amina. Tears streamed down her face. You are free now, she whispered. Rest, little ones. The spirit smiled, a sorrowful, grateful smile, before fading into the night, their whispers carried away by the wind. A deep stillness settled over the village. For the first time in decades, the Baobab tree stood in peace, not in fear, but in remembrance. The village would never forget again. And Amina had ensured that no child would ever be sacrificed in the name of desperate gods. She turned from the tree and walked away, the weight of the past no longer heavy on her shoulders. Behind her, the rain fell gently over the land, as if the sky itself was washing away the sins of the past. And in the soft rustling of the baobab's leaves, she swore she could still hear the voices of Adama and Nia, at peace, at last.